Some secrets don't stay buried because they're powerful. They stay buried because the wrong person might recognize them. The Romano mansion stood on a hill overlooking the Hudson River, its stone walls glowing gold beneath the pale light of dawn. From a distance, it looked less like a home and more like a kingdom carved from old money and older promises. Every morning before sunrise, Evelyn Foster walked through its front doors, wearing the same black and white Maid uniform, carrying the same cart of cleaning supplies, and pretending to be invisible. That was the safest way to survive inside a place like this. Invisible people weren't asked questions. Invisible people weren't noticed. Invisible people could keep secrets. The marble floor stretched across the grand entrance hall like frozen water. Chandeliers hung overhead, scattering soft reflections across the polished surface. Evelyn pushed her cart slowly, listening to the distant hum of security radios and the faint ticking of an antique grandfather clock somewhere deeper inside the mansion. The house always sounded awake, even when nobody was moving. She had worked there for 3 months. Long enough to memorize every hallway, long enough to learn which guard smiled and which never did, long enough to realize that Gabriel Romano, the owner of the estate, seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Most employees rarely saw him. Yet somehow every room carried his presence, his rules, his decisions, his shadow. Evelyn lowered herself to one knee and began wiping a faint streak from the marble, the scent of lemon cleaner mixed with the cool morning air drifting through the entrance. It should have been an ordinary moment. Instead, it became the moment everything started to change. Footsteps echoed from the staircase. Slow, measured, confident. Every employee in the mansion recognized that sound. Conversations stopped. Movement slowed. Eyes lowered. Gabriel Romano descended the staircase wearing a charcoal suit without a wrinkle anywhere on the fabric. At 34, he carried himself with the calm certainty of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The security team positioned near the entrance subtly straightened as he approached. Evelyn kept her focus on the floor. That was the rule. Finish the job. Stay unnoticed. Leave. But as Gabriel reached the bottom step, sunlight pouring through the massive windows caught something on his hand. A ring, silver and black, heavy, elegant. The world seemed to stop. Evelyn's hand froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her pulse stumbled. The symbol engraved into the ring wasn't unfamiliar. She had seen it before, not once, hundreds of times, in dreams, in memories, in old photographs she had spent years studying, a circle surrounded by 3 sharp lines branching outward like a crown. The image flashed through her mind with startling clarity. A little girl sitting at a kitchen table, a father smiling across from her, a necklace resting against her mother's sweater, the same symbol. The cleaning cloth slipped from Evelyn's fingers and landed softly on the marble. Gabriel's footsteps stopped, for the first time since entry toward her, only for a second, maybe less, but it was enough. Evelyn quickly bent down and retrieved the cloth, forcing herself to move normally, forcing herself to breathe, forcing herself to look like nothing had happened. Unfortunately for her, fear had a way of leaving traces. Gabriel said nothing. He continued toward the front doors as security opened them for him. Cold morning air swept into the hall. Seconds later, he was gone. The mansion returned to silence, yet Evelyn remained frozen beside her cart, because 18 years after losing everything, after believing every answer had vanished forever, she had just seen the same symbol from the last memory she had of her family. And what she didn't know was that before leaving the estate, Gabriel Romano had paused beside his waiting car and quietly asked a single question about the new maid who had stared at his ring. Some doors stay locked because they protect valuable things. Others stay locked because they hide the truth. By late afternoon, rain clouds had gathered over the Hudson, turning the mansion's tall windows into sheets of silver-grey light. Evelyn spent the day moving through her routine on autopilot. Fresh linens, guest rooms, polished railings, empty fireplaces. Yet every task felt distant, drowned. She could not erase from her mind the ring, the symbol, the memory. She had spent years chasing fragments, old newspaper clippings, forgotten records, half-burned photographs rescued from dusty archives. None of them had ever given her a real answer. Then, in less than 3 seconds, she had seen that symbol again inside the Romano mansion. The coincidence felt impossible. Near sunset, the head housekeeper handed her a new assignment. The East Wing needed dusting. Several employees exchanged quick glances. Nobody complained, but nobody volunteered either. The East Wing occupied the oldest section of the estate. Most of its rooms remained unused. Some had been closed for decades. Evelyn pushed her cart down a quiet corridor lined with oil paintings and antique sconces. The farther she walked, the quieter the mansion became. The distant sounds of staff and security slowly disappeared until only the soft creak of old wood accompanied her footsteps. A heavy brass gate blocked the final hallway. To her surprise, it stood slightly open. She hesitated, then stepped through. Dust floated through shafts of fading sunlight. White sheets covered antique furniture like silent ghosts. The air smelled of cedar, old paper, and time. Room after room sat untouched, preserved, forgotten. Evelyn worked carefully, wiping surfaces and straightening objects. Then she noticed something unusual. One door stood apart from the others. Unlike the surrounding rooms, it had a modern electronic lock. No dust covered the handle. Someone still used it. Her eyes lingered on the door longer than they should have. A faint voice echoed from somewhere behind it. Not conversation, a recording. She could not make out the words. Before she could move closer, another sound interrupted her. Footsteps. Evelyn immediately stepped back. The footsteps belonged to Gabriel Romano. He emerged from the far end of the corridor, carrying a folder beneath one arm. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the hallway as he approached. For a brief moment, surprise crossed his face. Not fear, not anger, curiosity. Employees usually avoid this part of the house, he said. His voice remained calm, almost conversational. Evelyn lowered her eyes. I was assigned to clean this floor. Gabriel glanced toward the locked door before looking back at her. Most people asked to be reassigned. I did not know that. A faint smile touched one corner of his mouth before disappearing. Now you do. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just unexpected. Evelyn noticed that he carried himself differently than the stories suggested. There was authority in every movement, but none of the arrogance she had imagined. Then his gaze shifted downward, directly toward the small silver pendant hanging beneath the collar of her uniform. The pendant instantly disappeared beneath the fabric as Evelyn adjusted her sleeve. Too late. He had already seen it. Something unreadable flickered across his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or confusion. Before either could speak again, another voice called from the end of the corridor. An elderly man wearing a dark suit approached quickly. The mansion's longtime butler. His name was Walter. The moment his eyes landed on Evelyn's pendant, all color drained from his face. He stopped walking, stopped breathing, stopped blinking. The reaction lasted only a second, but it was impossible to miss. Sir, Walter said quietly to Gabriel, never taking his eyes off Evelyn. You have a phone call waiting downstairs. The frightened butler, the confused maid. Then he nodded and turned away. Moments later, he disappeared down the corridor. Walter remained. The old man's hands trembled slightly. His eyes never left the pendant hidden beneath Evelyn's uniform. Where did you get that necklace? He asked. The question came so quickly it sounded rehearsed. Evelyn's heart began pounding. Why? Walter looked as though he regretted asking. Without another word, he turned and walked away. But what he did not realize was that a folded photograph had slipped from the folder, tucked beneath his arm, and landed silently on the floor behind him. And as Evelyn bent down to pick it up, she saw the image of a smiling family standing beside a lake 18 years ago, a family whose last name was Foster. Sometimes the smallest piece of paper can carry the weight of an entire lifetime. Evelyn stood alone in the dim corridor long after Walter disappeared. The photograph trembled slightly between her fingers. Dust floated through the fading evening light. The mansion felt quieter than ever, as though even the walls were waiting to see what she would do next. Slowly she lowered her eyes to the image. A smiling family stood beside a lake beneath a bright summer sky. A man, a woman, a little girl. The picture had faded with age, but not enough to erase the faces. Evelyn's chest tightened. She recognized them immediately, not because she remembered every detail. Memory had become unreliable after 18 years. Faces blurred, voices faded, moments fractured, yet some things survived. The way her father tilted his head when he smiled, the way her mother rested one hand on her shoulder, the shape of the lake behind them. The photograph showed the life she had lost. At the bottom corner, written in black ink, were two words, Foster family. For several seconds she could not move. The corridor seemed to tilt around her. Every question she had carried for years suddenly felt closer than ever before. Why would a photograph of her family exist inside the Romano mansion? Why had Walter reacted with such fear? And why had Gabriel seemed unsettled when he noticed her pendant? Evelyn slipped the photograph carefully into her apron pocket. She knew she should report it, return it, pretend she had never seen it. Instead, she did something she had not done in years. She followed her instincts. The next morning arrived beneath a blanket of fog rolling in from the river. The mansion emerged from the mist like something suspended between past and present. Evelyn completed her assignments as usual, but her attention remained fixed on Walter. The elderly butler moved through the estate with the same precision he always had, greeting guests, directing staff, managing schedules. Yet every time his eyes landed on her, he immediately looked away. By lunchtime, Evelyn became certain of one thing. Late that afternoon, she found him alone in the mansion library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves surrounded the room. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows. Walter stood on a ladder organizing leather-bound volumes when Evelyn stepped inside. He noticed her instantly. His shoulders stiffened. "I found something yesterday," Evelyn said quietly. Walter climbed down from the ladder without answering. The photograph. Silence, heavy and uncomfortable. It belonged to my family. Walter closed his eyes for a moment, not surprise, resignation, as though he had spent years hoping this conversation would never happen. "You should not be asking questions about the past," he said carefully. "Why?" Walter looked toward the library doors before lowering his voice. "Because some stories never end the way people hope. Did you know my parents?" For several seconds, only the sound of rain filled the room, then Walter answered, "I knew of them." Evelyn's pulse quickened. It was the first real answer anyone had given her in years. "How?" The old butler hesitated. His eyes drifted toward the pendant hidden beneath her uniform. "That necklace belonged to your mother." Evelyn froze. Nobody outside her family should have known that. Nobody. Walter immediately seemed to regret speaking. He stepped away. "I have already said too much. Please." The word escaped before she could stop it. Walter studied her face. The fear was still there, but something else had appeared beneath it. Guilt. "There was a time," he said softly, "when your family's name was spoken often inside this house." Evelyn felt the room spin. Why? Before Walter could answer, the library doors opened. Both turned instantly. Gabriel Romano entered carrying a folder beneath one arm. The atmosphere changed the moment he stepped inside. Calm, controlled, observant, his eyes moved from Walter to Evelyn, then to the tension neither had managed to hide. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked. Nobody answered immediately. Walter lowered his gaze. Evelyn felt her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Gabriel's expression remained unreadable. Then his attention shifted toward the pocket of her apron, where the edge of the old photograph had become visible. And for the first time since meeting her, a flicker of genuine shock appeared in his eyes. The truth rarely arrives all at once. More often, it appears in fragments, forcing people to decide whether they are brave enough to look closer. The library seemed smaller beneath Gabriel's gaze. Rain continued sliding down the windows in slow silver lines, while silence settled heavily between the three of them. Evelyn instinctively moved her hand toward the photograph in her apron pocket. Gabriel noticed the motion immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the faded corner of the picture, now visible above the fabric. Walter looked as though he wanted to disappear entirely. "Where did you get that?" Gabriel asked. His voice remained calm, but something underneath it had changed. Evelyn hesitated. Every instinct told her to protect the photograph, to protect herself, yet after years of unanswered questions, she was tired of pretending. Slowly, she removed the picture and held it up. Gabriel stepped closer. The room felt frozen in time. Then his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That photograph was supposed to be stored in a private archive. Evelyn's pulse quickened. "Why is my family in your archive?" The question landed harder than she intended. Gabriel's eyes lifted from the photograph to her face. For the first time, she saw genuine uncertainty there. Not fear, not anger, something more complicated. "Your family?" he asked quietly. Evelyn nodded. "That is my mother, my father, and me." Walter lowered his head. Gabriel looked back at the image. The rain tapped softly against the glass. Somewhere in the mansion, a clock chimed the hour. "I was told that photograph belonged to an old business record," Gabriel said. "I never examined it closely." The answer sounded honest, yet it created even more questions. Evelyn took a breath. "Then why does your butler know my mother's necklace?" Neither man answered immediately. Walter finally spoke. "Miss Foster." The sound of her last name hanging in the air changed everything. Gabriel turned toward Walter instantly. "Foster?" Walter closed his eyes. The mistake had already been made. Evelyn felt her heartbeat stumble. She had never given her full name when she was hired. Only Evelyn Moore. Gabriel's attention shifted back to her. Every detail of her face seemed to sharpen inside his focus. "Your last name is Foster?" Evelyn slowly nodded. A strange expression crossed his features. Not recognition, not yet. More like a distant memory trying to surface. Before anyone could speak again, thunder rolled outside. The lights flickered briefly. Walter seized the interruption. "Sir, the storm is getting worse." The maintenance team reported a leak in the old storage level beneath the east wing. Gabriel continued looking at Evelyn for another moment before turning away. We will continue this conversation later. Then he left the library. The heavy doors closed behind him. Walter released a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. Evelyn immediately faced him. What is happening? The old butler stared at the photograph. You are asking questions that should have been answered a long time ago. Then answer them. Walter hesitated. The conflict inside him was obvious. Finally he spoke. There is a storage room beneath the east wing. Old records, old belongings, things nobody has touched in years. Evelyn felt a spark of hope. Will I find answers there? Walter looked toward the closed library doors. I think you may find more than answers. That night the storm covered the estate in darkness. Wind rattled the windows. Tree branches swayed beyond the glass. Most of the staff had already retired to their quarters when Evelyn quietly made her way back toward the east wing. A small flashlight rested in her pocket. Her heart pounded with every step. The hidden staircase leading downward sat behind an aging wooden panel near the locked corridor. Dust covered the railing. The air smelled of old paper and forgotten years. She descended slowly. 10 steps, 20, 30 at the bottom. A narrow room stretched into darkness. Shelves lined every wall. Boxes sat stacked from floor to ceiling. Some carried dates older than she was. Her flashlight beam moved across the labels until it stopped Foster. The name appeared on a weathered storage box near the back of the room. Evelyn's breath caught. She stepped closer and carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay dozens of documents, photographs, and a small leather journal. But resting on top of everything else was a picture frame covered in dust. As she wiped the glass clean, her entire body went still. Because standing beside her father in the photograph was a much younger Walter. And standing beside Walter was a teenage boy who looked exactly like Gabriel Romano. The past had a strange way of waiting patiently in the dark until someone finally opened the right box. Evelyn stared at the photograph while the beam from her flashlight trembled across the dusty frame. Her father stood smiling beside Walter. The younger version of Gabriel stood nearby, no older than 16 or 17, dressed in jeans instead of tailored suits, looking nothing like the untouchable man who now controlled the estate above them. For several seconds, she could only listen to the distant rumble of thunder beyond the stone foundation. The discovery raised more questions than answers. If Gabriel had known her family, why had he never said anything? Why had Walter looked terrified every time her last name surfaced? And why had someone hidden all of this beneath the east wing? Evelyn carefully placed the photograph aside and opened the leather journal. The pages had yellowed simple notes. Dates, deliveries, meetings, names. Nothing extraordinary at first. Then she found a familiar surname, Foster. Her pulse quickened. She turned the page. The next entry mentioned her father again. Another page referenced a construction project near the Hudson nearly 2 decades earlier. She continued reading, piecing together fragments of a story she had never known existed. According to the journal, her father had worked closely with people connected to the Romano family long before the tragedy that destroyed her childhood. Not as an employee, not as a servant, as a trusted partner. The realization unsettled her. Everything she had believed suddenly felt incomplete. A floorboard creaked somewhere behind her. Evelyn immediately closed the journal. Her flashlight swung toward the darkness. Nobody appeared, yet the feeling remained. She was not alone. Less than a minute later, footsteps echoed down the staircase. Calm, steady, familiar Gabriel emerged from the shadows carrying a lantern. Warm light spread across the room, replacing the harsh beam of her flashlight. Neither spoke at first. His eyes moved across the open box. The photographs, the journal, the documents scattered around her. Surprisingly, he did not seem angry, only concerned. Walter told me where you went, he said quietly. Evelyn stood. You knew my family. Gabriel looked toward the photograph resting beside the box. The younger version of himself stared back through the glass. I knew of them, he answered. Not the way you think. Evelyn folded her arms. That is exactly what Walter said. A faint shadow of a smile appeared and disappeared just as quickly. Then perhaps Walter was being honest. The storm above intensified. Rain drummed against the distant roof. Gabriel stepped closer to the storage shelves and picked up another photograph. His expression softened slightly as he studied it. Your father was respected here. Evelyn searched his face for signs of deception. She found none. That only made things more confusing. Then why was everything hidden? Gabriel lowered the picture. For the first time since she had met him, uncertainty crossed his features. I have been asking myself the same question. The answer surprised her. Powerful men were supposed to have answers. Gabriel seemed to have his own mysteries. As he returned the photograph to the box, something slipped free from between 2 pages of the journal and floated onto the floor. Both looked down. It was a folded document, older than the rest. Gabriel picked it up and carefully unfolded it beneath the lantern light. The moment he read the first line, his entire expression changed. Not fear, not anger, recognition, deep and immediate. Evelyn saw the color leave his face. "What is it?" she asked. Gabriel remained silent. His eyes continued moving across the page. Finally he looked up. This should not exist. The document was a ledger entry dated 18 years earlier. Several names appeared on the list. Most meant nothing to her. One did, Foster, and directly beside her father's name was a handwritten note that made Gabriel go completely still. Because according to the record hidden beneath the mansion for nearly 2 decades, her father had been scheduled to meet with the Romano family only hours before everything changed. Sometimes a single sentence can destroy years of assumptions. The storm continued through the night as Evelyn stared at the ledger in Gabriel's hands. Rain hammered against the foundation above them. The lantern light flickered softly across the old paper. Her father's name remained frozen on the page beside a meeting scheduled with the Romano family only hours before everything in her life changed. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn reached for the document. Gabriel handed it to her without resistance. She read the line again and again. The words never changed. Her father had not been a stranger caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had been connected to the people who owned this mansion. Connected closely enough to appear in private records hidden beneath the estate. A cold feeling settled in her chest. "Why was he meeting with your family?" she asked quietly. Gabriel looked toward the shelves filled with forgotten boxes. "I do not know." The answer should have sounded reassuring. Instead, it felt dangerous. Because if Gabriel truly did not know, then someone had spent 18 years making sure nobody found out. Evelyn closed the ledger and stepped away. The storage room suddenly felt smaller. The walls felt closer. Every discovery pointed back to the same place. The Romano family, the mansion, the symbol on the ring, the hidden records, the photograph. Her eyes lifted toward Gabriel. For the first time, doubt slipped into the trust that had slowly formed between them. He noticed immediately. Powerful men often learn to recognize suspicion before anyone spoke it aloud. "You think I am hiding something?" It was not a question. Evelyn hesitated. The silence answered for her. Gabriel exhaled slowly, tired. "Evelyn, 18 years ago, I was a teenager. I was not running anything. But your family was." The words came out sharper than she intended. Gabriel did not argue. That only made her more uneasy, because part of her wanted him to deny it, to tell her she was wrong. Instead, he simply stood there beneath the lantern light, carrying a burden she could not yet understand. Less than a mile away, the river churned beneath the storm while another piece of the past quietly waited to surface. Unfortunately for Evelyn, she had already reached a conclusion before all the evidence had been found. She looked down at the ledger again. Every road seemed to lead back to the same family, the same estate, the same symbol. Her heart wanted answers. Her fear had already chosen a suspect. "My family disappeared after that meeting," she said, "and every clue points here." Gabriel's expression tightened, not because of the accusation itself, because he could see how logical it sounded. "Then keep looking," he said quietly. "Find the truth, but do not stop at the first explanation that feels convenient." Evelyn wanted to believe him. She truly did. Yet the evidence sitting in her hands refused to cooperate. The storm rattled the ceiling overhead. Somewhere in the mansion, a distant alarm beeped once before falling silent again. Gabriel glanced toward the staircase. "It is late. You should get some rest." Evelyn laughed softly. There was no humor in it. "I do not think that is possible anymore." She gathered the photograph, the journal, and copies of the pages she had found. Gabriel did not stop her. That surprised her almost as much as everything else. As they climbed the staircase back toward the mansion, neither spoke. The distance between them felt larger than it had an hour earlier. The east wing corridor stood empty when they emerged. Shadows stretched across the floor. The house felt colder. Gabriel turned toward his office. Evelyn turned toward the staff quarters. Then she stopped because tucked beneath her door was a sealed envelope she had never seen before. No name, no return address. Only one symbol stamped into the wax seal. The same symbol engraved on Gabriel Romano's ring. The answers people fear most often arrive when there is no way left to avoid them. Evelyn closed the door to her small room and stared at the envelope resting in her hands. Rain still tapped softly against the window. The storm had weakened, but the unease inside her had only grown stronger. The wax seal carried the same symbol engraved on Gabriel's ring. For several moments she simply stood there, listening to the sound of her own breathing. Then she carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single folded document, no letter, just a photocopy of an old official record. At the top appeared a date from 18 years earlier. Beneath it sat a list of names. Her eyes moved down the page, then stopped completely. Evelyn Foster. Age 9, status, deceased. The room seemed to fall silent. She read the line again and again. The words remained unchanged. According to the document, she had died 18 years ago, yet she was standing there holding the paper. Her pulse raced as she continued reading. The record included signatures, agency references, and transfer information from an emergency relocation program she had never heard of. Someone had deliberately erased her from official records. Someone had wanted the world to believe she no longer existed. The next morning arrived beneath pale grey skies. Sleep had never come. Evelyn carried the document hidden inside her bag as she crossed the mansion grounds toward the staff entrance. Every person she passed suddenly looked different. Every conversation felt suspicious. If someone had hidden her identity for 18 years, who inside this estate already knew? What she did not know was that across the mansion, Gabriel Romano was staring at a different file containing the same name. Less than 12 hours earlier, he had ordered a review of every surviving archive connected to the Foster family. The results had uncovered something he never expected. Evelyn entered the kitchen and immediately noticed the atmosphere had changed. Staff members lowered their voices when she approached. A few glanced at her before looking away. Rumors moved quickly inside large houses, especially after midnight discoveries and private meetings with the owner. She tried to ignore it. Unfortunately, someone else could not. Walter appeared beside her carrying a tray of coffee cups. The old butler looked exhausted. "Miss Foster," he said quietly, "you need to come with me." There was urgency in his voice, no hesitation, no room for argument. Minutes later, they stood inside a small office overlooking the gardens. Sunlight filtered through clouds, casting soft silver light across the room. Walter closed the door behind them. Then he removed a key from his pocket and unlocked a drawer in his desk. From inside, he retrieved a worn manila folder. Evelyn recognized the name written across the front immediately. Foster. Her heart pounded. Walter placed it on the desk. "I kept this hidden for 18 years. Evelyn looked up sharply. "Why?" The old man seemed older than ever in that moment. "Because someone asked me to." "Who?" Walter hesitated. Then he answered, "Your father." The words struck harder than any revelation she had uncovered so far. Evelyn could barely process them. "That is impossible. I know how it sounds." Walter carefully opened the folder. Inside were photographs, letters, and legal documents. At the very top rested a picture of a young girl with blonde hair standing beside a lake. Evelyn recognized herself instantly. Walter pointed toward the back of the photograph. Written there in faded ink was a message. "If anything happens, protect her. Do not let them know she survived." Beneath the message was her father's signature. Tears threatened to surface, but Evelyn forced them back. One question remained, one terrible question. If her father had gone to such lengths to hide her existence, then who exactly had he been trying to hide her from? Before Walter could answer, the office door opened. Gabriel stepped inside holding a file in one hand. His expression was unlike anything she had seen before. Not distant, not guarded, shocked. Because after reviewing the newly discovered records that morning, Gabriel Romano had finally learned the truth. Evelyn Foster was supposed to have died 18 years ago. Some truths do not feel like answers, they feel like earthquakes. The office fell completely silent after Gabriel spoke. Sunlight filtered through the clouds outside, painting the gardens in muted shades of grey and silver. Evelyn sat motionless in front of the open folder while the words echoed through her mind. She was supposed to have died 18 years ago. According to every official record that existed, she had never grown up, never attended school, never built a life, never walked into Romano Mansion carrying a cleaning cart and 1,000 unanswered questions. She was a ghost on paper, a memory frozen in time. Gabriel stepped closer to the desk and carefully placed his own file beside Walter's folder. Neither man spoke immediately. The weight of the moment seemed too large for ordinary conversation. Finally, "Who erased me?" Her voice sounded distant, even to herself. Gabriel exchanged a brief glance with Walter before answering, "That is what I have been trying to understand." He opened the file. Inside were copies of government records, relocation forms, and archived reports recovered from Romano family storage. Most had been marked confidential years ago. One document immediately caught Evelyn's attention. It contained a photograph taken several weeks after the tragedy that had shattered her childhood. The image showed a young girl wrapped in a blanket, standing beside an unfamiliar woman. Evelyn stared at it. Something deep inside her recognized the scene even though the memory remained fragmented. The woman's face had been redacted, but the little girl was unmistakably her. "I remember this coat," Evelyn whispered. Walter closed his eyes. "Then some of your memories are returning." Gabriel turned another page. "The relocation records show that you were moved under a protected identity." "Protected from who?" Neither man answered immediately. The silence felt louder than any response. Then Walter slowly lowered himself into a chair. His hands trembled slightly. For the first time since Evelyn had met him, he looked less like a butler and more like a man carrying years of regret. "Your father believed someone was searching for information he refused to give." Evelyn's heart pounded. "What information?" Walter shook his head. "That part was never shared with me." Gabriel frowned. "The files do not mention it either." The answer frustrated Evelyn. Every discovery seemed to reveal another locked door, another missing piece, another shadow hiding behind the truth. She rose from her chair and walked toward the office window. Outside, workers moved across the distant grounds while the river shimmered beneath the afternoon light. Life continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened, yet everything inside her had changed. "For 18 years I searched for answers," she said quietly. "And now every answer creates another question." Nobody disagreed because it was true. Gabriel stepped beside the window but kept a respectful distance. His reflection appeared faintly in the glass beside hers. "There is one thing I do know." Evelyn turned toward him. His expression had become unusually serious. "You were never supposed to find this place." The statement hung in the air. "What does that mean?" Gabriel took a slow breath. The original relocation file included a restriction order. He opened the folder again and removed a final document. It specifically named one location you were never meant to return to. Evelyn felt dread rising before she even looked at the page. Gabriel handed her the paper. Her eyes moved across the text, then stopped. The location listed in bold letters was impossible to misunderstand. Romano Estate. Evelyn's pulse froze. 18 years ago, someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide her existence. Someone had protected her identity. Someone had made sure she would never return to this mansion, and yet somehow, after nearly 2 decades, she had walked directly back into the one place she had been forbidden to find. The hardest part about finding the truth was realizing how much of your life had been built around things you never knew. Evelyn left the office carrying copies of the documents while the afternoon sun slowly broke through the clouds above the estate. The gardens shimmered with fresh rain, water dripped from stone statues, birds returned to the trees as though the storm had never happened, yet nothing felt normal anymore. Every path she walked seemed connected to a history hidden beneath her feet. Every room inside the mansion seemed to contain pieces of a story she had spent 18 years trying to understand. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she no longer felt like an employee. She felt like someone standing in the middle of a mystery that had begun long before she was old enough to remember it. That evening, Walter quietly approached her during dinner service. His face remained serious. "There is something you need to see." 20 minutes later, they stood inside a smaller archive room tucked behind the mansion's west library. Unlike the storage area beneath the east wing, this room felt organized. Shelves held labeled boxes. Old photographs rested inside protective sleeves. Historical records filled locked cabinets. Walter moved directly toward a drawer near the back wall. From inside, he removed a leather album worn smooth by time. "I found this after reviewing the older family records," he said. Evelyn accepted the album carefully. Dust drifted through the warm golden light coming from a nearby lamp. Slowly she opened the cover. The first few pages contained photographs of charity events, construction projects, and family gatherings from years ago. Then she turned another page. Her breath caught. There, frozen beneath a sheet of protective plastic, was a photograph she had never seen before. A teenage Gabriel stood beside her father on a dock overlooking the Hudson River. Both were smiling. Both looked relaxed, comfortable, familiar. The relationship visible in the photograph did not match anything she had imagined. Her father looked proud. Gabriel looked happy, not powerful, not distant, just young. "They knew each other," she whispered. Walter nodded slowly. "Better than most people realized." Evelyn continued turning pages. More photographs appeared, community events, family gatherings, charity projects. Again and again her father appeared alongside members of the Romano family. Nothing about the images suggested enemies, nothing suggested fear. The discovery unsettled her more than any previous revelation, because if her father trusted them, then why had he hidden her from them? Before she could ask another question, a folded note slipped from between 2 pages and landed softly on the table. Walter looked surprised. He had clearly never seen it before. Evelyn unfolded it carefully. The paper had yellowed with age. The handwriting was unmistakably personal, not official, not formal. It was addressed directly to Gabriel. Her eyes moved across the words. Gabriel, if anything happens, promise me one thing. Protect her. Do not let her carry the burden of what we discovered. Some truths destroy families. Keep her away from this place until it is safe. Signed, Evelyn's hands began to shake. Walter sat down slowly. Neither spoke. The room seemed suspended between past and present. Her father had written directly to Gabriel, not to Walter. Not to an attorney, not to an investigator, to Gabriel. Suddenly another memory surfaced, fragmented, incomplete, a voice, a familiar voice. Someone carrying her through darkness while telling her everything would be okay. Someone young, someone frightened, someone she had never been able to identify. Less than an hour later, Evelyn stood alone beside the river, at the edge of the estate. The sunset painted the water in shades of gold and copper. Wind moved gently through the trees. Behind her, footsteps approached. She already knew who it was. Gabriel stopped a few feet away, neither spoke immediately. Finally, Evelyn turned toward him. The note remained folded in her hand. My father trusted you, she said quietly. Gabriel looked toward the river. His expression carried a sadness she had never seen before. Then, after a long silence, he gave an answer that changed everything. Because on the night your life changed forever, I was the one who carried you away from the lake. The memories people spend years searching for rarely arrive gently. Evelyn stood motionless beside the river while the last light of sunset shimmered across the water. Gabriel's words seemed impossible to absorb. For years she had imagined countless versions of the night her life changed. She had imagined strangers. She had imagined heroes. She had imagined villains, never him. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth across the shoreline. Neither spoke for several seconds. The silence felt fragile, as though one wrong sentence could shatter everything they had uncovered. Finally, Evelyn found her voice. You carried me away? Gabriel nodded slowly. His eyes remained fixed on the water. I did not know who you would become. I only knew your father asked me to help. Evelyn's pulse quickened. My father trusted you that much? A shadow crossed Gabriel's expression, more than he should have. The answer surprised her. There was no pride in his voice, only regret. They walked slowly along the riverbank as dusk settled over the estate. Lights began appearing inside the mansion behind them. Golden reflections glowed through the tall windows. For the first time, Gabriel spoke about the past without hesitation. He told her about the construction projects their families had worked on together, community programs, charity initiatives, business partnerships that had nothing to do with the darker rumors people associated with the Romano name. He described Michael Foster as honest, stubborn, and impossible to intimidate. The description sounded exactly like the father Evelyn barely remembered. Then his voice grew quieter. A few weeks before everything happened, your father became worried. Evelyn stopped walking. Worried about what? Gabriel looked toward the river and the frustration returned immediately. Every answer seemed to arrive attached to another mystery. Gabriel continued. He said he had discovered something important enough to protect, but he never told me what it was. Evelyn folded her arms against the cool evening air. You expect me to believe he trusted you with my life, but not with the reason? I do not expect anything. His answer came calmly. I am only telling you what happened. The honesty made it difficult to argue. They resumed walking. Above them, stars slowly appeared through breaks in the clouds. The estate felt different now. Smaller, less intimidating. The mansion no longer seemed like a fortress hiding secrets. It felt more like a place haunted by unfinished conversations. Less than a mile away, inside the mansion archives, Walter continued searching through records that had not been opened in decades. He was looking for one specific file, a file he had hoped never to see again. Back at the river, Evelyn noticed Gabriel remove something from his coat pocket. It was an old photograph, carefully folded, worn at the edges. He handed it to her. Her breath caught immediately. The image showed a younger version of herself, sitting on a wooden dock beside the lake. Her father stood behind her, and next to them stood a teenage Gabriel holding a fishing rod and laughing at something outside the frame. Evelyn stared at the picture in disbelief. Gabriel offered a faint smile. You were 8 years old. You caught a fish and insisted it was larger than mine. Despite everything, she almost laughed. Almost. The photograph felt strangely comforting. Proof that her life had once contained ordinary moments. Proof that not every memory from the past was connected to loss. Then Gabriel's expression changed. The warmth disappeared. His attention shifted toward the mansion, toward a figure running across the lawn in the distance, Walter. Even from far away, the urgency in his movements was obvious. Minutes later, the elderly butler reached them, breathing heavily. He carried a thin folder clutched tightly beneath one arm. His face had gone pale. "I found it," he said. Gabriel immediately understood. Evelyn did not. "Found what?" Walter looked directly at her. The fear in his eyes answered before his words did. "The file explaining what your father discovered 18 years ago. Some mysteries survive for decades, not because they are impossible to solve, but because nobody wants to live with the answer." The three of them returned to the mansion in silence. Night had fully settled across the estate. Warm lights glowed through tall windows while the river reflected fragments of moonlight beyond the trees. Walter carried the folder as though it weighed far more than paper ever should. Evelyn walked beside him, her pulse growing faster with every step. 18 years of questions had led to this moment. Whatever waited inside that file had shaped her entire life. Minutes later, they sat inside Gabriel's private study. A fire crackled softly in the stone fireplace. Shelves lined with books stretched from floor to ceiling. The room felt insulated from the rest of the world. Safe, quiet, permanent. Walter placed the folder on the desk and slowly opened it. The oldest document rested on top. A report prepared nearly 2 decades earlier. Gabriel read the first page. His expression darkened. Then he handed it to Evelyn. She scanned the text carefully. According to the report, her father had uncovered evidence of financial fraud connected to a senior Romano executive. Not Gabriel, not Gabriel's father. A trusted capo who had managed several business operations at the time. The man had been secretly diverting money from charitable projects and community development funds into private accounts. Michael Foster had discovered the scheme while reviewing construction records. Evelyn looked up. "My father found corruption?" Walter nodded. He intended to expose it. Another document confirmed the same story. Meeting notes, audit records, correspondence. Everything pointed toward one conclusion. Michael Foster had uncovered a betrayal hidden inside the Romano organization itself. Gabriel leaned back in his chair. "That explains the warnings. It explains why he became concerned." Evelyn continued reading. The next pages contained interviews, internal memos, and private correspondence recovered years later. Piece by piece, the final picture emerged. The senior capo had acted independently. He feared exposure, he feared losing power, he feared what Michael knew. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly. For years she had imagined a vast conspiracy centered around the Romano family. Instead, the truth looked smaller, sadder, more human. One person's greed, one person's fear, one terrible chain of consequences that had destroyed countless lives. Walter removed another document from the folder. This was found after the investigation ended. Gabriel accepted it first. His eyes moved across the Evelyn. It was a confession written years later by the same capo before his death from natural causes. No dramatic revelations, no hidden villains waiting in the shadows. Only admissions, regret, accountability. He acknowledged concealing evidence, manipulating records, creating confusion that prevented the truth from surfacing sooner. Evelyn lowered the paper. The room felt strangely still. "So he is gone." Walter nodded. There would be no confrontation, no revenge, no dramatic reckoning. The person responsible had already faced his own end long ago. The realization left behind something unexpected, emptiness. Gabriel watched her carefully. "I know that is not the ending you imagined." Evelyn stared into the fire. Orange light flickered across the room. "I do not think I ever imagined an ending at all." For a long moment nobody spoke. Then Gabriel walked to a cabinet and removed a small wooden box. He placed it gently on the desk in front of her. "This belonged to your father." Evelyn's breath caught. Slowly she opened the lid. Inside rested letters, photographs, and a simple silver compass. Beneath everything lay one final envelope addressed in Michael Foster's handwriting. To Evelyn, tears filled her eyes before she even opened it. The letter inside contained only a few lines. "If you are reading this, then you found your way back. Do not spend your life carrying anger that belongs to someone else. Build the future I wanted you to have. Be happy." Evelyn pressed the letter against her chest. Across the room, Gabriel remained silent, and for the first time since arriving at the mansion, she realized the mystery that had defined her entire life was finally over. What remained now was a different question altogether. What would she do with the future her father had asked her to choose? When a person spends years chasing the past, choosing the future can feel like the hardest decision of all. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of sunlight that seemed determined to reach every corner of the estate. For the first time since Evelyn had stepped through the mansion doors months earlier, she woke without questions racing through her mind. The mystery was gone. The hidden records had been found. The truth had finally surfaced, yet peace felt unfamiliar. She sat beside the window of her room holding her father's letter while golden light spilled across the floorboards. Beyond the glass, gardeners moved through the grounds. Birds crossed the bright blue sky above the Hudson. Life continued, simple, ordinary, real. The words in the letter remained clear in her thoughts. Do not spend your life carrying anger that belongs to someone else. Build the future I wanted you to have. Be happy. For years she had believed happiness would come after answers. Now she understood that answers and happiness were not the same thing. Late that afternoon, the estate hosted a small private memorial near the lake. No reporters, no public event. Only a handful of people connected to the story that had remained hidden for so long. White chairs stood beneath old trees. The water reflected the afternoon sun like polished glass. Walter sat quietly in the front row. Several long-time employees attended as well, not because they had known every detail, but because they had known Michael Foster. They had remembered him, and somehow that mattered. Evelyn stood near the shoreline after the memorial ended. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and lake water through the air. The silver compass from her father's wooden box rested in her hand. She listened to the distant laughter of guests leaving the gathering. For the first time in 18 years, she felt close to her parents without feeling trapped by their absence. Footsteps approached across the grass. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. Gabriel stopped beside her. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt comfortable now, no longer filled with suspicion or unanswered questions. Just understanding. The lake shimmered beneath the afternoon light. I spoke with the staff director this morning, Evelyn said quietly. Gabriel glanced toward her. And? She smiled faintly. I resigned. He absorbed the news without surprise. Are you leaving? The question lingered between them. Months earlier, the answer would have been immediate. She would have packed her bags and disappeared before sunset. But the woman standing beside the lake was no longer the same woman who had arrived searching for ghosts. Evelyn looked out across the water. I do not know yet. Gabriel nodded slowly. There was no pressure in his expression, no expectation, only patience. The kind of patience that comes from finally understanding what another person has survived. A few moments later, Walter approached carrying a small folder. One final item, he said with a gentle smile. Inside was a proposal for a new charitable foundation. Community housing, education grants, youth programs, the same causes Michael Foster had once supported. Evelyn studied the pages. At the bottom sat a blank line waiting for a signature. Gabriel spoke quietly. Your father helped build these projects years ago. I thought perhaps they deserved a second chance. Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, not as the owner of the mansion, not as the man connected to her past, simply as Gabriel. The person who had spent months helping her uncover the truth when it would have been easier to leave the past buried. The person who had carried a promise for 18 years without knowing whether it would ever matter. Slowly, she picked up the pen. Then she signed her name beneath the foundation documents. As the ink dried in the afternoon sunlight, Evelyn realized something unexpected. She was no longer choosing between the past and the future. She was finally allowing them to exist together. Sometimes the most extraordinary endings do not arrive with fireworks or grand speeches. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the place where everything first began. 1 year later, the Romano mansion looked different, not because the stone walls had changed, not because the grand staircases or marble floors had been rebuilt. The difference lived in the people moving through it. The estate felt warmer, lighter, more alive. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows on a bright spring morning, filling the entrance hall with golden reflections. Staff members crossed the polished floor, carrying flowers, decorations, and boxes filled with supplies for an afternoon celebration hosted by the Foster Foundation. Laughter echoed through rooms that had once felt silent. The charitable projects Evelyn helped lead had already funded scholarships, community housing initiatives, and youth programs across the region. The work her father once believed in had become real again, not as a memory, as a future. Near the front entrance, Walter stood proudly adjusting a floral arrangement while pretending not to notice that everyone kept asking him the same question. He answered each time with the same smile. "They will be down shortly. Upstairs." Sunlight spilled across the private suite overlooking the Hudson River. Evelyn stood beside the window, wearing a simple cream-colored dress. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to impress. The silver compass from her father's wooden box rested in her hand. She traced her thumb gently across its surface. The past no longer felt like a wound. It felt like part of the road that had brought her here. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Walter appeared at the door. His eyes immediately grew emotional. "Your father would be very proud today." Evelyn smiled. "Thank you." Walter nodded once before quietly leaving her alone again. A few minutes later, another set of footsteps approached. These she recognized instantly. Gabriel entered the room carrying a small frame wrapped in protective cloth. His expression softened the moment he saw her. Even after everything they had experienced together, there was still something wonderfully calm about the way they looked at one another now. No secrets, no misunderstandings, no unanswered questions standing between them, only trust. Gabriel placed the frame on a nearby table. "I finally found the right place for this." Evelyn carefully removed the cloth. Her breath caught immediately. It was the photograph from the storage room, the one showing her parents Walter and a younger Gabriel standing together beside the lake. Restored, cleaned, preserved. Not hidden anymore. Gabriel stepped closer. "I thought it belonged where everyone could see it." Evelyn looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I think so too." Later that afternoon, guests gathered inside the mansion's grand entrance hall. The same hall where Evelyn had once knelt on the marble floor, holding a cleaning cloth while trying to remain invisible. The same hall where she had first noticed the symbol on Gabriel's ring. The same hall where a forgotten mystery had quietly awakened. But today nothing felt the same. Music drifted softly through the room. Sunlight poured through the windows. Families from foundation programs mingled with staff members and community leaders. Hope had replaced silence. Evelyn stood beside Gabriel near the center of the hall while a photographer prepared to capture a commemorative picture for the foundation's first anniversary. Before the photograph was taken, Gabriel reached for her hand. The gesture was simple, natural, familiar. She looked up at him and smiled, not because the past had been erased, not because life had become perfect, but because they had both learned something far more valuable. The truth did not destroy them, it brought them home. Across the hall, the restored family photograph had been hung in a place of honor where sunlight touched it every morning. As the camera shutter clicked, capturing a new generation standing together beneath that same light, the mansion no longer felt like a place built to protect old secrets. It felt like a home. And for the first time in 18 years, Evelyn Foster no longer felt like someone searching for where she belonged. She had finally found it.